You've worked hard to build wealth. You've saved over $1 million for retirement. You're almost financially independent and you've achieved what most people only dream of achieving. But here's the problem. Sometimes when it comes to your adult children in their 20s, 30s, and even 40s, the advice that you want to give them just falls on deaf ears. How do you share the lessons that you've learned without feeling like you're telling them how to live? My name is Kevin Lau. I've spent the last 17 years helping people build financial independence, retire on their own terms, and I've noticed some patterns, some pitfalls, and strategies that consistently show up and make a difference, not just for my clients, but for the next generation, for their children, for their grandchildren. In this episode, I'm going to share 10 of the most important financial lessons I've learned, not only in working with successful clients myself, but also in my own financial independence journey that I hope you can pass on to your adult children in a way that actually lands. So if you're over 50 and you've been saving and investing diligently for retirement and you're very close to being financially independent, but you have beneficiaries whom you want to continue the same financial practices, being a good steward of the assets that you've worked so hard to accumulate, make sure to listen to this podcast episode, take notes, and make sure to share these lessons with your adult children, with your grandchildren. And of course, make sure to follow the podcast and subscribe to the YouTube channel because we're putting out weekly retirement related content specifically designed for you. All right, everybody, I'm super excited to do this recording. I am a little bit, I don't know if I'm under the weather in terms of sick or if it's allergies, but I'm not feeling 100%. My voice is not 100%, but I am a little bit jacked up about this episode. And partly because today is my 17-year anniversary in financial services as a financial advisor. Okay. August 28th, 2008, I walked into my first day of training at Northwestern Mutual, Washington, D.C., and that totally changed my life in a good way. Okay. And so in honor of my 17th anniversary, okay, obviously I'm recording this a few days before it releases, but in honor of that anniversary, I just wanted to share some lessons. I'm in reflective mode. I want to share some lessons that I've learned personally, helping individuals plan for and execute a successful retirement, but also lessons that I've learned in my journey as a W-2 employee and now as an entrepreneur. So I will say many of these lessons will apply to W-2 employees, but I will add a slightly different angle from an entrepreneurial perspective because that is just in my DNA at this point in time. So I hope you guys really find value in this episode. If you do, make sure to share it with someone else who has adult children or grandchildren who may want to share these lessons with as well. So the first one is as basic as it gets, and that is cash flow and savings discipline. Now, this may seem very, very obvious, very, very basic, very elementary, and it is, okay, but it is so fundamental, and it is something that most young people completely bury their head in the sand with. I know I did in my 20s. I did not want to see how much I was spending going to the bar or whatever it was. I didn't want to look at those things, okay? I was spending way too much money eating out, restaurants, entertainment. It was insane, but I just wanted to bury my head in the sand because I was hoping, hey, you know what? Hopefully my next paycheck will take care of that credit card bill. But what I'm telling you right now, if you can get into the habit of tracking your spending, I think this is where the key to everything else is tracking your expenses to see where you are. Because it doesn't matter what your savings goals are for retirement, or maybe you're saving for a house, or maybe your adult children are saving to buy a ring, right? You know, maybe they're looking to propose. They are not going to be able to do those things unless they can track their expenses and compare those expenses to what their income is coming in. It's impossible to have a plan without knowing where you're starting from. So I would say the biggest thing I wish I'd learned in my early 20s was creating some sort of automated system to track my expenses. Today, I use a software called Monarch Money, but there's tons of them. Every Dollar, YNAB, QuickBooks. There are tons of options out there in terms of automating, tracking your expenses for you so you don't have to manually input all those into Excel. God bless you if you're still doing that, but there are some systems and tools out there using technology to track your expenses and simply say, where am I overspending? Okay, obviously, and we'll talk about this later on, but there are certain things that you may be overspending relative to your peer group, but those things may be providing value to you. And so just because you might be overspending relative to your peer group doesn't mean you should automatically reduce or cut those things. On the flip side, there may be things that you are overspending on that are not providing you value. And those are the things that you can look to tackle in reducing some of those expenses and some of that overhead. But if you can get into a habit of coming up with a savings rate early on, and I always say 20% is a good starting point. Target 20% of your gross income. Okay. If you can target 20% of your gross income to savings, and that could be a combination of short term savings and long term savings, that compounding in your that you save in from your 20s and 30s just makes such a big difference in your 40s, 50s, and 60s. And you will thank yourself later on in life if you can do these things in your 20s and in your 30s. And you can't do that without knowing where your cash flow is going today. All right. Number two is having a solid emergency fund. But I want to go a little bit deeper into this idea of an emergency fund. Okay, so at its core, emergency fund of 101, you want to have about 3 to 6 months of your expenses and savings. And the reason for that is because if you get sick, or if you lose your job, if there's a major home repair or car repair, you have the cash to pay those expenses as opposed to going into credit card debt and potentially paying 20 to 25% interest payments on that credit card debt. So an emergency fund is there to protect you from going into debt. But what I will say is this could also be a war chest that you're building up. Okay. I like to use the term war chest because this could be a fund that you're kind of building up for future investments. Maybe it's starting a business, like I did in my early 30s. Maybe it's investing in real estate. Maybe it's buying your first home. There could be several things that you're saving for that you don't want tied to the stock market. Okay. You don't want to invest your emergency fund. You want to keep it in something boring, cash, money market accounts, CDs, treasuries, whatever it might be, high yield savings, something that is short term that's going to give you a decent interest rate. And you're lucky because you actually are getting 4% on the cash right now. When I was just getting started in my early 20s, cash was paying 0%. I went to the workforce right after the Great Recession or right during the Great Recession. Interest rates were cut to zero. So we earned nothing on cash. But cash is not there to earn money on it. You're more interested in return of the money than return on the money. That's a better way to look at it. But for you entrepreneurial folks out there, cash is king. If you don't have that cash war chest, it's very tough to go out and start a business brand new with no experience and ask for a business loan. Very, very difficult to do and could be very costly. So instead, if you have that war chest that you're building up to give you that runway so you don't have to borrow money to start that business, super key. Something I'm so grateful that I worked hard in my 20s and early 30s to do because that allowed me to start my business. And now we're just getting started, baby. Okay, number three is related to debt and more importantly, your credit. So there is good debt and there is bad debt. Okay. Now, bad debt, the obvious ones, you don't want to buy a bunch of things on a very high interest credit card and pay 20 to 25% interest. It's impossible to earn that amount of money on the side to actually break even on those interest payments. But instead, if you can focus on paying for those things with cash and maybe borrowing money for other things like buying a home, right? That's good debt in my opinion. Mortgage could be good debt. Now, interest rates are a little bit higher today than what they were 10 or 15 years ago, but that's okay. Interest rates go up and down. So at some point in time, you might have the ability, even if you buy a home today, to refinance that later on. But you can't do any of those things unless you have a good credit score. So the first thing I'd recommend you do, maybe you have adult children maybe they're in college or maybe they're just finished college or maybe they're just getting their first job. You could potentially co-sign on a credit card with them. Got to be careful with that because then if they screw up, that's going to ding your credit as well. But if you are paying for things with a credit card and you're paying off that balance on time, that is the key. You're not late for anything. You don't carry a balance. You're not using the majority of that credit. That is going to improve your credit score over time. And that will help you when you go to buy a home or let's say finance a vehicle, whatever that might be down the road, or even just get in the door with a lease. Maybe you're looking to rent the place for 12 months. They look at your credit score, believe it or not. When you're turning on your utilities, they're going to look at your credit score to determine whether or not you need to put down a down payment for your water bill or utility bills. Those things matter, and your credit score is at the core of all of that. Your credit score is your financial reputation. So you need to make sure you protect that and use credit wisely. Don't use it frivolously, okay? Personally, I will tell you, I messed up in my 20s big time with credit cards. My expenses were insanely high. I was living way above my means in my 20s. I was trying to keep up with all the Joneses at my company. Not a good thing. I racked up significant credit card debt during that period of time until I realized, who am I trying to impress? What am I trying to do? And really thinking about what are my values and coming up with a game plan to track my expenses, pay off that debt, and then build up that war chest, like I mentioned earlier, and get a head start to retirement savings. Number four, Start investing as early as possible. Okay. I think this is a big mistake a lot of people make is they kind of just jump towards paying off student loans or, maybe it's paying off a car loan. Where instead you can do a combination of those things. You can pay off your student loans, but you can also begin to invest for the long term. And there are a lot of tax advantages if you invest in certain vehicles like Roth accounts or health savings accounts or traditional 401ks. And what I would say is the more you can lean early on. So if you have adult children that are, let's say, early on in their career, they're in their 20s and 30s, I highly recommend they start with the Roth accounts. Unless their income is super high, maybe they're a software engineer and they're coming out of college making 200,000. That's a different conversation. But if they're at a job that's paying them a starter salary out of college, and then they're going to work up over time, they may be more beneficial to start the Roth accounts first. Pay the taxes now at your lower bracket, let the money then get into the Roth and let that money grow tax free for 20, 30, 40, 50 years until you have to tap into those funds or until you even need to tap into those funds. Later on, as your income grows, then you can drop that down, or then you could start to transition into the pre tax contributions versus the Roth contributions. But I think if you can get that savings muscle early, and this is kind of goes hand in hand with that 20% target, like I mentioned earlier, you can allocate, let's say 10% or 15% towards retirement, or maybe it's 5% early on. Maybe you're at least taking advantage of the matching contribution. That would be the bare minimum. If your company is giving you a 5% match, you better believe you're putting in 5% into that 401k or Roth 401k, because that is a guaranteed 100% rate of return. So absolutely do that and then get comfortable with the idea that you want this money to be invested aggressively. You're not invested for conservative. You don't want a bunch of bonds in your portfolio. You want this to be 100% in the stock market, probably a mix between US and international stocks, maybe a little bit more heavily weighted to US stocks, but you want to be super aggressive early on in your 20s, 30s, and 40s. That way, later on, that compounding can work in your favor. And then you can have that ability to dial back your risk if you decide to in your 50s and 60s when you become financially independent. But in no way, shape, or form should you be looking at anything less than 85 to 90% in stocks if you can stomach that from a risk tolerance standpoint. But then short term money, like I said, that 20% savings, if you're putting some dollars away for the short term, maybe it's buying a home, maybe it's buying a ring, whatever that might be. Maybe it's building up cash to start a business. Like I mentioned earlier, you're more interested on return of the money than return on it. It's not going to move the needle if you earn an extra 3% on the portfolio. Instead, you want to be guaranteed that when the opportunity arises for you to start that business, for you to buy that real estate property, for you to buy that ring, that you have the money available and you're not dependent on what the stocks are doing at that moment. Number 5 is getting adequate life and disability insurance immediately. Now, the question I typically ask people that are younger is just for fun, what do you think your most valuable asset is? And oftentimes people will spit out their 401k or their home. Those are all great answers, but really the real answer, especially the younger folks out there, and again, if you're sharing this with your adult children, it's really your income potential, your earnings over the next 20 to 30 to 40 years. Okay. And what would be a reason to lose those earnings? Loss of a job, loss of an income due to death or disability. So, in order to protect against those risks, you need to have a solid emergency fund, which we've already covered, but you also need adequate life and disability insurance. Now, maybe it's because I worked for Northwestern Mutual for 6 years before branching out into the investment advisory space and ultimately the retirement planning space. But I have seen bad things happen to healthy people. Okay. Not even just death or disability, but also insurability. They get a diagnosis and all of a sudden now they're starting a family. Now they want to go buy life insurance and they're not able to do so. Or the policies that they're trying to buy, they're going to be paying an astronomical premium for those particular policies. So while you're young and healthy, get a large block of life insurance. Get as much as the company is going to offer you because when you're young, this is pennies on the dollar. We're talking probably for a $2 million term policy, you might be paying $80 a month. Okay. And again, we are talking term insurance. And this is what I'd recommend you start with is buy a large block of term insurance and then get some disability insurance. You might have some disability through work, but you may want to get a supplemental policy as well that you can carry with you from employer to employer, or if you start your own business, very important. If you look at this one, if something were to happen to you, not only death or disability, but also insurability, and you don't have that term insurance, you can't buy in to the term insurance at that point in time. You may be uninsurable or the premiums might be super high. So get the term insurance while it's affordable. Focus on doing some of those other things with your cash flow, buying a home, saving and investing into your 401k, maybe getting to the max amount of those 401ks and IRAs or even the HSAs. Later on, if you are the profile of a super high income earner and you need or want permanent life insurance later on in life, then you have the ability to convert that term and policy to permanent. But don't get talked into by some slick insurance agent to buy a bunch of permanent life insurance that you may or may not need early on in your career. Very important, and coming from someone who used to sell life insurance. Number six is learn the basics on taxes. Okay. You know, go beyond just the TurboTax. Yes, you can go in and file your tax return on TurboTax, but understand this idea of, your lifetime tax brackets, when your tax brackets might be higher versus lower, understanding marginal versus effective tax rates, understanding the benefits of pre-tax contributions versus Roth contributions. These are all things that are so important as you go along in your wealth building journey that the earlier you learn those things, the better off you're going to be over the course of 20 to 30 to 40 years. And then I would go a step further. For those, a little bit of a pro tip is understanding the tax benefits of entrepreneurship and also the tax benefits of investing in real estate. Super key. Number seven is buy a home ASAP. Now, this is not going to apply to everybody, because if you live in a crappy housing market with no job growth and really bad schools, probably wouldn't recommend you buy a home. But if you live in a decent market with some growth opportunities, maybe you're in a great school district, go ahead and try to buy a home as soon as possible. Don't worry about having 20% down for your down payment. I think this is a big misconception. And what prevents people from getting into their home as soon as possible is they look to save 20%, which might take you years to do. And all of a sudden, housing prices have then gone up 15, 20 to 30%. So now it's even, it's unaffordable then as well. So, as a first-time home buyer, you can look at an FHA loan, which only requires 3.5% down. Yes, you're going to be paying mortgage insurance, but that's going to fall off once you hit that 20% in equity. So again, thinking through as quickly as possible, if you're in a decent housing market, try to get that first house. And then what I would say is, this is personally something I did, is hold on to that first house as long as possible, because most likely it may not be your forever home. Maybe you buy that home. Maybe you're just married. It's just the two of you. Buy a house that you're like, hey, this could be a good property that we can hold on to for a long-term rental or a short-term rental. And then later on, you can move. You still have that favorable mortgage that you had on that first property, and then you could buy another property as you continue to save and invest and build up a wealth on the side. And then you can buy that second house while you continue to rent out that first house. I will tell you, single-handedly, that has been the biggest wealth building tool for me personally outside of my business, is that first home that we bought. It allowed me the flexibility to start my business. It allowed me the flexibility to have my wife stay at home and not have to work. Super key. Now, obviously, we hit a home run. We bought that house in 2016, 4 years before the pandemic, and then post-pandemic, prices in Florida shot up. We may not have that over the next 3 to 4 to 5 years, but long-term, real estate is still a great asset class to hold. And if someone else is renting your property later on, they're going to be paying down your mortgage. You're going to be getting the tax benefits to that as well. And maybe you even earn a little bit extra cash flow while still participating in that long-term price appreciation. Okay, this is a good one. Don't let others tell you what to value. This is number 8. Don't let others instill their values on you. Okay. It's very easy for financial talking heads out there, even podcasters out there, to tell you, hey, stop spending $6 a day at the coffee shop, or stop wasting money on grocery deliveries, or stop paying for those expensive gym memberships or golf memberships, or stop purchasing that expensive car. Because if you have that money instead, you can have a pile of cash in 20 to 30 years if you invest it with me. Listen, that may be true on paper, okay? But at the end of the day, we all have different values. And some of the money that you're spending today, you could still look at that as an investment. I'll use the example of my wife staying home with my boys. When we started to have kids, she decided to stay home. She was earning north of six figures, that she could have continued to earn north of six figures and continue to receive those pay raises. So the amount of income that she's lost out on over the last 5 to 6 years, on paper, you maybe look at that and say, you're an idiot. And then, at the same time, Kevin, you started your own business and your W-2 went from, pretty nice multiple six figures down to zero while you built up the business. What are you doing? Okay, well, listen, we looked at that as an investment. My wife, and I included, she wanted to be home with the boys during those early years, okay, and still wants to be a stay-at-home mom, okay. That's really, she loves it. It is Not an easy job by any stretch, but she loves it. She enjoys it. I don't think she could go back into the corporate workforce at this point in time, just because even though my oldest son's in school full time, and then my other twins, they're going to school 3 days a week. There's still a lot going on: pickups, drop offs, activities. There's just a lot to juggle. So we looked at that as an investment. Okay, so I guess what I'm saying is stand firm in your own values. Understand. And this is why the cash flow is so important. So you can track those cash flows and figure out, hey, our biggest expense is childcare. Let's weigh that against the salary. How important is that? Okay. If you lost your salary, the childcare goes down, but then maybe you have more time to spend with the kids. Okay. Again, I'm not guilt tripping anyone to be a stay at home parent. Okay. This is definitely not for everybody. And I think with today's modern workforce, it's a totally different deal. But I just use that as an example. And it might be a similar example of looking at those gym memberships. Maybe you're spending $200 a month on a CrossFit gym. But if that's allowing you to be in a Superman or Superwoman shape, so be it. So understand what's important to you, what your values are, and align those values with your cash flow. Okay. And if those values are not aligned with your cash flow, that's when you can make adjustments. But you can't know that until you actually track your cash flows and know what your values are. All right. Number 9, probably my favorite one on this list, is building wealth outside of work. This is the big one for me because I've seen this helping people plan for retirement. Many people get a little bit trapped. Okay. They get that first job and it's paying them a nice salary. And then they get that first raise, like, oh, this is nice. And then they get that first bonus. And then they're looking at their 401k contribution matches and like, oh, this is pretty nice. And all of a sudden, after 10 years, they realize they're kind of stuck. They can't leave because they can't find something else that they really want to do. Okay. And I say stuck for the folks that do not like what they're doing. Okay. Now, if you love what you're doing and you're getting compensated for it, that's awesome. That's, I think, the dream for everybody. But many folks that I see and talk to, they don't love what they do. And that's why they come to talk to us in their 50s. They're like, hey, I want to quit my job as soon as possible. How do I do that? Because they're in the situation that they're in the rat race. They have been in a situation, either forcibly or really by design, they've been trapped in their system. And so what I'd say is building wealth outside of work is so critical. Maybe that's entrepreneurship. Maybe that's real estate. Maybe that's building up a large 401k and investment account. So all of a sudden at 45, you're like, you know what? I've saved enough for retirement. I don't even need to put more money away for retirement. I'm not going to retire today. I don't have enough to retire fully, but maybe I go do a passion project in my 40s, right? Or you maybe better yet in your 30s, or maybe you start a business in your 30s like I did. This is a big thing for me. My business is my most valuable asset right now on my balance sheet. I could not have built up what my business is worth in a 401k plan or a brokerage account, okay, over the last 4.5 years. There's no way. It would have been impossible, okay? So my business is my most important asset. Now, I'm not saying go out and start a business, but what I'm saying is you might have opportunities and passions that you want to pursue, and don't let the golden handcuffs trap you, because this is what all of these benefits are designed to do. The pensions, the 401ks, the HSAs, all of these ancillary group benefits. Maybe it's a little supplemental childcare. It's designed to trap your mind into the W-2 rat race. And if you're listening to this, and if you are younger and you're entrepreneurial like myself, understand that, embrace it, still take advantage of those benefits, but then try to figure out, always think about the exit strategy. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Always think about the exit strategy, and don't just look at the exit strategy as retirement age 65. I'm talking about exit strategy from a job that you may not love, and allow you to pursue something that you do love and that is a passion for you and something that you feel like you're most valuable in. So that's my words of wisdom on number 9. All right, number 10, money and relationships are so important. Okay. And the people that you choose to spend your life with, okay, I'm talking your life partner. For me, it's my wife. For you, it might be your husband, whatever. And their relationship with money matters just as much as your relationship with money. Okay. And if you can try to have some discussions and have conversations about money and what they value, what their values are, okay, how they've been handling, what did their parents teach them about money early on? What have they learned about money since they've been in the workforce? What stresses them out about money? What's their career aspiration? Are they looking to build a successful career, climb the corporate ladder? Are they looking to, start a family and be a stay-at-home parent? Are they looking to start a business or early retirement? I think having these conversations is so critical, and better yet, before you get married to that person. Okay, because the reality is 50% of marriages end in divorce. Okay, we've all seen that statistic get thrown out. But I think if you can be intentional about this discussion, money is one of the top stressors in every relationship. And my relationship is no different. We have stressors about money. I bring it up to my wife. I'm like, what? Why did you buy 20 things from Amazon that are showing up? You don't even know what's in the box. She's like, oh, what is this again? Oh, that's diapers. Oh, that was back in the day. Oh, what is this again? Oh, that's new shoes. But these are things that we need and our kids need. Okay. So, for me, it's like, oh, you're spending all this money, but she's spending money on things that we need. So I think us having a huddle up on a regular basis about our cash flow, about our budgeting is very healthy. And then also me being open and her being open to what is stressing us out about money. I think if you can get into the habit of having those money conversations early on in your relationships, the better off you're going to be. And as a parent, if you're listening to this and you're, most likely in your 50s and 60s, or even your 70s, maybe it's your adult children. So maybe you need to kind of practice what you preach. Maybe you need to actually have some conversations with your adult children about money yourself. And maybe that could open up the door for better advice. Because like I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, oftentimes this advice can fall on deaf ears. And it's because, kids, we don't want to listen to our parents. Let's be honest. Yeah, I don't like listening to my parents these days. Love them to death. We have a great relationship. But if the advice is coming from them versus another third party or organically, like it was my idea, very different. Okay. So I think there are ways that you can kind of lead the witness, if that makes any sense. And maybe you sit down with your adult children and maybe share some stories about money with your own relationship, with your own marriage, with your own career journey, with your own entrepreneurial journey. And you can maybe just share some of these things, some of the wins, some of the losses. Let your kids listen to those things and then allow them to create a natural environment where they can ask questions. Okay. You're basically sharing some of the wins and losses. You're being open and vulnerable. That might lead for them to be open and vulnerable and maybe asking you some questions, which then you could facilitate some of the feedback that we provided today. Okay. Better yet, you could certainly share this podcast with them. You could just say, hey, listen, there's a guy, I listened to his podcast. I want you to listen to this episode. This one is for you. This is for the young folks out there. Okay. And I do this podcast because I'm probably around the age closer to the age of your adult children than you yourself. So I kind of have a unique perspective where I've worked with thousands of people that are retirement age, and then with my own personal financial planning journey with my wife and I, being a W-2, her staying at home, being a stay-at-home parent, starting a business with 3 kids under the age of 2. Okay, that's not for the fan. I would not recommend that to most people. Okay. My gray hairs, you can't really see that on camera. I'm looking at the camera right now. You can't really see all the gray hairs. I've got some salt and pepper going on. I think my point in saying all this was I have a unique perspective on both sides. And I think sometimes that advice can kind of land a little bit flat if you're just constantly telling, as opposed to sharing and having an open discussion. Okay. Allowing them to ask you questions, which then you can feed this advice to them as well. Because their financial vision for the future is probably very different than yours. Their perspective is different than yours. I promise you that. Okay. 20, 30 years ago, people coming into the workforce, they had a pension. They would work at the same company for 35, 40 years. They would retire, they'd get their pension gold watch, and they'd be riding off into the sunset. And maybe they'll live 10 or 15 years if they're lucky. Get Social Security pension, comfortable. These days, the likelihood of living until 100 is much higher. And people don't want to work in the same job for 30 to 40 years. They want to look for opportunities. They want to challenge themselves. They potentially even want to move or work remotely. There are so many the world has changed, especially post COVID, the world has changed. So their perspective is different than yours. So understand that and don't judge them on it. However, you can take some of the lessons that you've learned in your own financial independence journey and try to instill those. Because at the end of the day, who's inheriting your assets? It's probably your adult children. And then ultimately their children, your grandkids. Okay. So I think the more open conversations you can have, the more you're facilitating these open conversations, the more likely they're having these conversations then with their potential partners. You could potentially also eliminate some of the risks of, hey, they're marrying the wrong person. They get a divorce because of some money issues, some disagreements about money. And now you're worried about inheritance and trusts and all the whole mess. Okay. Not saying it's going to be perfect. Not saying your kids are not going to go through hard times and ups and downs. No question. Okay. Everyone's going to go through bumps and bruises. I think that's healthy. Personally, I embrace the challenge. I embrace the ups and downs in life. I think it's much more fulfilling than a nice, easy I don't want to coast. I don't want easy. Okay. I was very fortunate. My parents, my dad had a nice little white collar job. And, we lived in the DC area. We weren't upper class. No, we were not upper class. We were middle class at best, but he provided for us. My mom was able to be a stay-at-home mom. And this is back in the 80s and 90s. So a little different times then than they are now. So you can't judge your children because your situation when you were raising kids and starting a family is very different than today. And I'm telling you that from experience. Most of my friends, most of my peers, there's dual working parents. Okay. Most of them. I'm just telling you. It's just because very difficult to support a family and have a nice lifestyle with only one income. Very difficult to do. So I think if we can try to go into these conversations without passing on judgment, but with the concept of like, hey, I want to add value to them. And the only way you're going to do that is if you try to understand where they're coming from. And the only way you can do that is you need to connect with them. And this might sound weird because you're like, hey, this is my kids. I can connect with my kids. Trust me right now, you may think you have a great relationship with your kids, but you may be a little bit mistaken. Okay. You don't really know 100% how they're feeling and what they're thinking, especially on this money issue. And I mentioned this in the podcast I think it was 2 or 3 podcasts ago. The lessons learned from Gene Hackman's death. And one of the takeaways that I recommended was having these courageous conversations while you're alive with your beneficiaries, with your adult children. Much better you do that versus you're in the grave. Your kids have questions about why you did things the way you did, and you're not there to answer them. Its legacy is not about how much you leave. It's about how you are remembered. And if you're remembered in a not so great light, maybe you left a big mess. Maybe you did some things that seemed a little bit controlling and you weren't there to explain why. That's a hard pill to swallow for those surviving children. Okay. So I'm just telling you that from personal experience and seeing this play out with clients, family members, friends. That's my plea to you. So, all right, that's my 10. I hope you guys found this helpful. And listen, I'd love to hear from you. You're in your 50s, 60s, 70s. I want to hear from you. What are some lessons that you want to pass on to your beneficiaries? What are some of those things that I missed? Or what are some of the things that I mentioned that you're like, hey, this is resonating with me. I love this concept. Or, hey, Kevin, this one, I don't really like what you said there. I'm going to eliminate that. I'd love to hear from you. You can either drop a comment in the Spotify or you can drop a comment on the YouTube channel. And again, reminder, if you're finding value in our content, make sure to please leave a 5-star review if you're feeling generous. It helps us tell the algorithm that our show is providing value, creating value. That's what we're trying to do. We want to create value. We want to add value. We want to enrich people's lives with, financial planning, retirement, tax, all of that good stuff. But ultimately, we want them to maximize their retirement spending, minimize their lifetime tax bill, and worry less about the financial markets. And if you're interested, if you're like, hey, you know what, Kevin, I'd love to learn more about working with you one-on-one in your firm. This is what we do on a day in, day out basis. This is what we do for our clients. Now, I would start with going to our website, www.imaginefinancialsecurity.com to learn more first. And then I would also then start with the retirement readiness questionnaire, which is also linked in the show notes of this episode. I appreciate all of you tuning in. Thank you so much for the support. It's been awesome. The podcast, the YouTube over the last year-ish, year or two. I'm having a lot of fun. I feel like we're just getting started on this journey. And so I appreciate all of you PFR Nation for supporting us and being with us every step of the way. And until next week, this is Kevin Law signing off. Oh, and before I sign off, forgot to mention, we've got a big weekend coming up because it's football season. College football is officially kicking off. I know week 0 last week, I don't even know there were games on. I was completely in the trenches with life. But this weekend is a big one. I'm going to Atlanta with a bunch of my college buddies and high school buddies. I had a bunch of high school buddies that went to Virginia Tech, and I obviously went to University of South Carolina. So we've got the Gamecocks versus the Hokies on Sunday in Atlanta. So I will be driving down Interstate 74, or was it 75? What the heck is that road? 75. I'll be making the drive down to Atlanta, and I'm going to be cheering on my Gamecocks in week 1. Super excited about that. So go Gamecocks. Hopefully when you're listening to this, we had a W. We're 1-0. But I do not want to take Virginia Tech lightly. Okay. They've been through some tough times over the last 2 to 3 years, but they're still Virginia Tech. So best of luck to all of you who are football fans, and week 1, whoever your teams are, hopefully you have a successful week, but we already know not everyone's going to be winning this week. So hopefully you guys have a great one. Enjoy your weekend, enjoy your time with your family, and I will see you all next week. Thanks.